Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and it's Billboard Breakdown. I don't remember. So look, it's hard for me to get all that enthused for whatever happens this week. I'll be straight with you. Even despite how hard I pan the album, I would put money that Juice WRLD is coming for an album bomb next week with Death Race for Love, with a lot of just streaming alone, and that means I can't guarantee what in this week will actually hold any traction. And given that outside of our new arrivals, this week seems fairly steady, that question feels more wide open than ever before. Well, I say more steady until you look at our top 10, and for another week here, we've got another new number one. The comeback that I certainly never saw coming, and certainly not one I assumed would hit this hard, Sucker by the Jonas Brothers at number one. Now, full disclosure, the Jonas Brothers were a bit after my time. They broke in an era where I was splitting my time between symphonic power metal and Hilary Duff, and I was always more interested in Glee anyway, so I didn't really have a lot of the historical context to expect this, especially as their biggest hit before this, Burning Up, only hit number 5, but the numbers aren't lying. Utterly dominant on sales and streaming, only lagging slightly on YouTube, but with a radio presence. While I know it won't hold the number one beyond this week, it'll be fascinating to see whether or not this will have any traction. But what will hold up beneath it probably becomes the more interesting question. Because while I'm inclined to say that 7 Rings by Ariana Grande is the most obvious contender, given that it still has radio and a presence on sales and streaming, the numbers seem to be a little shaky. Compare this to Please Me by Bruno Mars and Cardi B, which made a big rebound up to number 3 to re-enter the top 10, thanks almost entirely to the video, but it does have better streaming and sales presence, and it's narrowing in that radio margin. Hell, I'd argue it's got a better shot than Sunflower by Post Malone and Sway Lee, holding at number 4, because while the sales and the streaming are mostly stable, the radio is pushing this out a lot faster than I expected, which is also not the case for Without Me by Halsey at number 5 though. She slid down a couple spots because the radio is stable, but the sales and streaming, they sure as hell are not. Then we have our previous number 1 from last week, Shallow by Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, down at number 6. And this was to be expected. Hell, I'm a little bit surprised it didn't drop further, but the sales are great and the radio seems to be going for a full-on second win, so even with streaming falling off, this might have more staying power than I think anyone expected. Next is a slight boost for Wow by Post Malone up to number 7, and look, I still like the song, but I'm not about to get carried away by possible success here. Yeah, the sales of the radio, they seem okay, but the streaming certainly doesn't, which might be concerning for this longevity. It did rise above Happier by Marshmello and Bastille at number 8, but I've been convinced that this song's lasted way too long for weeks, and to see it finally lose some traction in all categories, that's good news. And on that note, Middle Child by J. Cole fell back to number 9. Yeah, it's got streaming, but the radio does not seem that interested in it, and the sales have fallen back considerably. Granted, I still see it holding above Sicko Mode by Travis Scott, which is at number 10 still, which is clinging to a leftover streaming even as its radio collapses. I would put money that this is out of the top 10 probably as early as next week. And on that refreshing topic, our losers and dropouts. In the latter category, it was pretty much the majority of what we saw last week, coupled with Backing It Up by Partisan Fontaine featuring Cardi B, This Feeling by the Chainsmokers and Kelsey Ballerini, and sadly, Nothing Breaks Like a Heart by Mark Ronson featuring Miley Cyrus, which just never got the momentum stateside it really should have. It became a hit in Canada, but just not in the US. And you could say the same about some of our losers this week. Nights Like This by Kalani and Ty Dolla $ign going to 79, and Red Room by Offset fell down to 73, and these are kind of expected. They never got the momentum they should have, whereas the rest are kind of expected dropouts. Always Remember Us This Way by Lady Gaga fell naturally to 64, Needy by Ariana Grande slid to 92, and Walk Me Home by Pink fell off that debut to 88. She better push that video soon, because this looks like a bad sign for her. But on the flip side, in order to plug in some of the gap, we saw a pretty sizable number of gains and returns. So let's start off with the latter, which can really be split into 2 categories: country and Billie Eilish. I mean, seriously, she got both When the Party's Over back at 95 and Lovely with Khalid at 91. And I'd certainly take her over the majority of the country I saw rebound, of which the best is probably On My Way to You by Cody Johnson at 99 and Love Wins by Carrie Underwood at 98. Because, let's be honest, I don't think anybody needs to hear Night Shift by John Party back at 86, or There Was a Girl by Riley Green at 71, or especially One That Got Away by Michael Ray at 89. Also, Bad Liar by Imagine Dragons came back to 72 for some reason, but let's stay on country when we go to our gains, because I sure as shit don't want to see Eyes on You by Chase Rice up to 70, or Make It Sweet by Old Dominion at 76. Granted, it's kind of relieved by Down to the Honky Tonk by Jake Owen at 69, and even Good As You by Kane Brown at 78, but the thought remains here. The rest here, well, I already mentioned Please Me, but the larger stump went to Girls Need Love by Summer Walker and Drake, surging up to 37, and I would put money on this becoming at least a minor hit, followed by Shot Clock by LMA getting a mild boost to 68. Finally, I got a very welcome surprise with Faucet Failure by Ski Mask the Slump God rising to 87. I don't really expect it to survive the album bomb coming next week given the competition in the same format and channel, but you know what, I can hope, right? Well, anyway, we got 12 new arrivals this week, and let's start off with something that looked promising. Number 100, Momma, I Hit a Lick by 2 Chainz featuring Kendrick Lamar.
Mama, I hit a lick. Mama, I hit a lick.
So I'll admit, I had some high expectations for this, if only because Kendrick Lamar can really deliver surprisingly great verses when nobody's expecting it, and a 2 Chainz song is exactly where that sort of thing can happen, which is why the buzz saying that the song was a dud was a little bit alarming. What's all the more alarming is that it really is that bad, and I can point to the exact culprit pretty quickly. Pharrell on production. Why in the nine hells he thought that clunky percussion with the off-key twinkling elements would flow well, I have no clue, but neither 2 Chainz or Kendrick can do much with it, leading to flows from both MCs that are very stiff and very awkward. But you know what, I'm not letting them off the hook here either, as 2 Chainz tries this weird falsetto on his verse that sounds awful, and yet I'd probably still say he has more interesting flexing content than Kendrick does, as it's painfully obvious that he's just not trying here, especially with that guttural low vocal he tries on both the hook and his verse. So yeah, this is really bad. But we're not done with 2 Chainz, because next up is number 94, Rule the World by 2 Chainz featuring Ariana Grande. Okay, this is much better, thank God. And again, I gotta give a lot of attention to the production here too. The more lush strings and horn samples flooding the Amory song behind them, it's kind of naturally flattering for 2 Chainz. And while I can tell that Ariana isn't really doing anything that's all that striking on her hook, she at least sounds comfortable here. Hell, I'd probably argue in some cases she sounds more comfortable than some cuts of Thank You Next. I really wish I could say the same for 2 Chainz though. Why is he trying for that weird staccato flow on his second verse? It just sounds a little awkward and unnatural, especially given how smooth Ariana is singing. Now, you know what? I will give credit to the content being a little bit better. 2 Chainz flexing about how much he loves his wife. That is a good look for him. But other than that, it's good, I like it, but I would struggle to call this great. Number 93, I Can't Get Enough by Benny Blanco, Tainy, Selena Gomez, and J Balvin. Okay, so I have to hope that Benny Blanco learned from the disaster that was Roses a couple months back with the new single, recruiting Selena Gomez and J Balvin for maximum crossover, and Puerto Rican producer Tainy in order to punch up the production. And seriously, what is with the production being so damn choppy on new arrivals this week? A friend of mine said this sounds like a fusion of the production from both Taste and the J Balvin song X, but I think my greater issue is how clunky and clipped the sample and even the vocal pickups feel. A cheap fusion of ideas that has given this as a hookup anthem. It's about the furthest thing from sexy. I will say it's at least a bit better than X thanks to the smoothing elements around the bridge and the final hook, but it still sounds really cheap and frankly painfully mediocre. Next, number 85, Whiskey Glasses by Morgan Wallen.
I don't wanna say the truth. She's probably making out on the couch right now with someone new.
You know, we don't have to keep giving careers to every other guy who wants to pump out an utterly forgettable bro country song, Nashville. It is an option, especially the last thing we got from this guy was a Florida Georgia Line collaboration. And this Yeah, not really a fan. Mostly because of how so much of the guitar melody feels fused into what might be a gurgling keyboard. It just curdles throughout the entire track, not helped by the auto-tune tacked onto Morgan Wallen's delivery. And when we get to the content, I don't know, points for referencing karaoke and pounding whiskey to get through a messy breakup, but those are points I'm immediately taking away from the forced pseudo-rap cadence and the fact that I'm probably going to wind up hearing this at country karaoke. Just swell. Otherwise, just kind of mediocre and forgettable. Which is unlike number 83, Old Town Road by Lil Nas X.
Ride till I can't no more. I'm gonna take my horse to the old town road. I'm gonna ride till I can't no more.
Well, folks, we knew this day would come. Although, if you're thinking that this is the first artist to ever get famous off of TikTok, I'd question your memories, because I remember when it was called Musical.ly, and the breakthrough of Jacob Sartorius. Oh, time, how has it flown since 2016. In any case, this is the breakthrough single for Lil Nas X, who I'm not really treating as a meme despite most of his songs seeming like extended jokes. And with this song, he got a 9 Inch Nails sample and made a slapdash fusion of a trap clunker with prominent banjo. And yet, even with all of it, I don't really hate this nearly as much as I feel I'm supposed to. Yeah, the auto-tune is muddy, and the production is clunky, and most of the second verse is embarrassing, and it's not even 2 minutes long, but the whole idea of the lone gunslinger fits kinda comfortably both into trap and outlaw country, and Lil Nas X at least has a somewhat convincing delivery. Probably take him over Morgan Wallen. Hell, if he bothered to take this seriously, there could be potential to make this an actual song. Sadly, he didn't, and thus this kind of wound up as a bit of a dud as well. And as soon as folks get sick of this on TikTok, it's probably just gonna be forgotten. Pretty much identical to what happened to the majority of Vine hits. And if that's heralding the second coming of that era, it's not gonna be good, but let's hope it's at least interesting. Number 77, Act Up by City Girls.
You could get snatched up, dirty ass dance, baby girl, you need to back up.
So if my unabashed support of twerk has meant everything, seriously, it's only grown on me since I covered it on this show, it does mean that I'm curious to see how City Girls will be able to leverage their success, especially given that there's no Cardi B or Drake cosign this time around. And honestly, I kind of get why it took the Act Up challenge for this to get big. Because for as much as Young Miami seems to be constantly slipping off the beat on her verse, and the content seems more dedicated to smacking back other girls and draining guys dry for all their money, and production and a hook that seems generally underwhelming, I'm not really wowed by this. I mean, personality does count for a lot, and City Girls have that, and I certainly prefer bars to a lot of what Trap's delivering recently, but yeah, not really a fan of this. At least not as much as I'd want to be. Number 75, Whip by 2 Chainz featuring Travis Scott.
Back it again, back it, back it, back it again. All winter, all summer, Range Rovers and Black Hummers.
So I'll admit I was curious how this would turn out, because while the content seems to lie in similar lanes, the difference in execution between 2 Chainz and Travis Scott is considerable, and I had the hope that there'd be a little bit more flow to this. And there actually is. Yeah, even if the content's a little bit underweight, there's a lot I like about this. I dig the murky rattles of the percussion off of what sounds like a synthwave keyboard, and Travis Scott's hook fits in pretty well. It's got some groove to it, even on the slightly tinny outro. And for the most part, I kinda like what 2 Chainz is delivering here too, except what was up with the shift in vocal fidelity on the second verse, which absolutely sounds like a punch-in done later, and probably doesn't exactly fit with the rest of the tune. Otherwise though, yeah, you know what? I like this. I'd be okay with it sticking around. Cool stuff. Number 74, Wish You Were Gay by Billie Eilish. So this looks like the first time a Billie Eilish song has actually nabbed some real controversy, specifically surrounding a bunch of accusations of queer baiting and homophobia, many of which were hurled at Girl Crush by Little Big Town 4 years ago and felt just as unfounded, although in this case it seems to take on more of a negative connotation, because while both songs are written from a place of longing from the protagonist, this one is trying to justify the guy's lack of interest in her, and now she's just wishing he was gay. Now, putting aside the guy Billie Eilish was apparently writing about actually did come out of the closet, I can see how this could come across as controversial, or at the very least self-serving, which is very telling because on the bridge of the song, Billie Eilish herself says she's being selfish for wanting such a petty justification for the guy not being into her. So, okay, you definitely appreciate the self-awareness there, sidesteps the controversy well, And yet it's probably the first Billie Eilish song that's falling flat for me, mostly because of the production. The let-in grainy percussion and the seedy pianos remind me more than they should of Melanie Martinez, and the entire song feels really oversold, really quite the opposite of the subtlety that's characterized Billie Eilish at her best. So yeah, I can appreciate her delivery and the subtle cleverness of the writing, but I'm not really feeling this. It's alright, but not better. Sorry. Number 56, Hear Me Calling by Juice WRLD.
Do you hear me calling? We no one, no drama. Not a fire alarm.
Now granted, if the alternative is goddamn Juice WRLD on top of a tropical pop groove that's just as leaden, I think we'd all be better off with Billie Eilish here. And look, I've already mentioned the worst elements of this song when I reviewed the album, specifically the line, hit the beach in LA like you a beach ball. But can we talk about how clingy this song is, with highlighting how her posters are on the walls inside his head, and yet on the same verse he's demanding to know where the fuck she thought she was going? I mean, come on with the faux Jamaican accent he's trying here. Look, be it catchy or not, there is nothing I can endorse in this. It's just kind of creepy and really badly written. Next, number 52, Look What God Gave Her by Thomas Rhett.
I know she's got haters, but it ain't her fault. No, look what God gave her.
Oh, I was hearing warnings about this one, especially from folks who started to give Thomas Rhett more of a chance, with the warning that this was steering back into disaster again for the lead-off single for his fourth album. And I'm sorry, why does this sound like a rejected Andy Grammer song? The organ filling, the cheap fake percussion, the perfunctory acoustic guitar, a cadence that sounds maddeningly familiar and wouldn't be surprised was yanked from somewhere else. A couple of my friends suggested Jared Neiman's Lover Lover, and while that's not quite it, I see the similarity, and hell, Thomas Rhett's not above this. I remember Die Happy Man, he's done it before. And then you get the borderline checklist nature of the song, discussing everything God gave her with a magnanimous air that is right on the border of the same smugness that led me to dislike Thomas Rhett in the first place. Now, you know what, to his credit, it does sound better produced than the garbage that was on Tangled Up. There's a little bit more of a groove behind this one, and if you're looking at its intent, it's basically kind of harmless. But you know what, when I compare this to what I know Thomas Rhett is capable of making, yeah, absolutely a step back. I'm not endorsing this. Number 39, I by Lil Skies.
Since I love that hoe. I haven't been the same since I lost my bro. I say I'm gonna change when I know I won't.
So it's funny, I was actually kind of looking forward to this song, mostly because when I've covered Lil Skies on Billboard Breakdown before, I've noticed he can occasionally structure a decent hook, and even if the content was kind of inessential, he had some good melodic instincts. I put him in the same category as A Boogie with the Hoodie, in that regard at least. And as for this song, yeah, kind of a bit of a letdown, if I'm being honest. The faded horn melody buried behind the underweight trap beat, the lack of greater melodic flair and the auto-tuned but grainy vocals, and yet when you pair it with content that seems kind of dead-eyed and an inability or even desire to change or evolve in a haze of weed smoke, even if he's not saying anything precisely bad on the song, about the girls or otherwise, he's not really saying anything all that interesting here either. And somehow I feel disappointed, even though I get the feeling I probably shouldn't be. And finally, number 1, Sucker by the Jonas Brothers. And now we get the elephant in the room. The big comeback story that's always sparked a bit of controversy thanks to Portugal the Man highlighting some similarities to their 2017 breakthrough single, Feel It Still. But before we can even get to that, I feel obliged to at least give something of an opinion on the Jonas Brothers. And here it is. I don't care. Even going back to their hits in the mid-2000s, and there were more of them than I think anybody remembers, none of this has ever really stuck with me. Mostly because the cheap Disney-fied production seemed to forget to add any sort of actual melodic groove or crunch or distinctive vocal harmonies. Yeah, I remember liking When You Look Me in the Eyes, at least a little bit, but it doesn't make up for the forgettable and sterile SOS or Burnin' Up or A Little Bit Longer or Tonight. Anyway, the club boom meant that their fourth album nabbed no real charting presence. I choose to believe they're consistently horrible synthesizer choices. But okay, now the group is back with a big, huge comeback single. And honestly, I'm not really wowed by it. I mean, for one, Portugal and Man weren't lying in highlighting similar chord progressions and tones, especially that post-chorus whistle, the falsetto vocals, and the thickened bass line, but this song doesn't quite have the languid pace or the melodic richness that came with the horns on Feel It Still, instead opting for a more frenetic tempo that still winds up feeling oddly colorless, because this is a Frank Dukes production, and thus most of the instrumentation sounds really canned and stilted, especially the guitars. Now, to be fair, I do think the vocal harmonies are a lot better, and I do like how the tempo reflects the messy desperation of the song, but beyond that, I gotta be honest, there's just not much that really grips me here or is all that memorable. I mean, it's not bad, but it's kind of boilerplate. That's all. Just kind of okay. And that was the week. Somehow I kept on thinking this would be better than it is, but here we are. And funnily enough, the both songs I found myself liking the most, they came from 2 Chainz, with Whip nailing the best of the week and Rule the World with Ariana Grande nabbing honorable mention, and Travis Scott was on Whip. Man, did not see that one coming. Now for the worst, yeah, 2 Chainz is here too, with Momma Hit a Lick with Kendrick Lamar being the worst of the week, almost on disappointment alone, with dishonorable mention going to Hear Me Callin' by Juice WRLD because duh. But next week, Juice WRLD's revenge will be in full swing on me, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.